Good morning, everyone. My name is Zosia Lutkiewicz. I'm with the European Platform for Democratic Elections. Welcome to our webinar today. We will give 2 more minutes for everybody in the waiting room to join, and then we will start. Great. Thank you once again. Once again, welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to this webinar on the Hungarian election. My name is Zosia Lutkiewicz. I'm the president of the Political Accountability Foundation and the board member of the European Platform for Democratic Elections, EPDE. Just for you to know, we are recording the webinar and then we will post the recording later on YouTube. We'll be happy for you also to share the recording later on with your contact. Today, for those of you who are not familiar with EPD, just a friendly reminder, we are a network of 17 nonpartisan citizen election observer organizations from 14 countries across Europe. And our work focuses mainly on understanding how electoral processes function in practice and how we can work together to protect them. And today and in the coming weeks, we will be focusing on Hungary. Hungary's elections matter not only for Hungarians, but also for the entire European continent. And I think I don't need to explain to any of you joining us today why this election is the biggest election in Europe and maybe the second biggest election in the world this year, together with the midterms in the US. For us as observers, we look at elections not just as a single day when people vote, but as a process. And today we want to focus on what happens in the run-up to the election on April 12th, but also the days and weeks after the votes when the results will be interpreted, maybe contested, and how they will be translated into political power. So we are not here to predict who's going to win. This is not the business that we're in as citizen election observers or election observers in general. But we want to unpack the range of possibilities and the different post-election scenarios, from smooth transitions to more complex or contested pathways, and what this might mean in practice for Hungarian voters, for Hungarian institutions, for civil society, but also for the international community. So thank you once again for joining us. You will hear from our speakers, which I will be introducing in a second. And then we will have plenty of time for questions, hopefully. So I want to encourage you to use the Q&A function on Zoom, which you will find on the bottom of your screens, to ask questions to our panelists. And I will do my best to make sure that we have time to answer all of your questions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our illustrious panel, starting with Zsófia Benuta, who is the co-founder and director of Unhacked Democracy. And Zsófia works at the intersection of electoral integrity and civic mobilization across Europe, with, of course, a strong focus on Hungary. She also leads Rewire, which is a hope-based civic incubator helping civil society leaders in developing human-centered, future-oriented democracy projects grounded in neuroscience and creativity. And she is also an Obama leader. Next, Daniel Hegedus, who is the deputy director of the Institute for European Politics based in Berlin, and a senior expert on democratic backsliding and rule of law in the European Union. His work focuses on autocratization, foreign policy, and the political dynamics of Central and Eastern Europe, particularly in the Visegrad region, and of course, particularly in Hungary. And he is a regular contributor to international policy debates. And last but not least, Gábor Taka, who is a senior research fellow at the Central European University, specializing in voting behavior, political attitudes, and electoral processes. And his research explores how electoral systems, media, and political communication shape democratic outcomes, including issues such as turnout, districting, political polarization. So I'm very happy to have all of you with me today. And we will be starting our conversation on Hungary today with Gabor. If you could take us through the context in which these elections are happening, and also for the campaign. How has it changed over the last couple months? What have been the main themes? And maybe if you could also speak to allegations, proven or unproven, of foreign interference. The floor is yours. You are muted.
Yeah. Good afternoon, and thank you for your interest in this election. I'm really sorry, but for the last 5 minutes, I cannot find the way back to sharing my presentation with you, so I will do it without a presentation. Um, uh, so what we are looking at is, of course, an interesting election because Viktor Orban, the prime minister, became such a worldwide symbol of illiberal populism and has been in power for 16 years, giving inspiration to a lot of like-minded people across Europe and the world. And that's probably the reason why this election is watched with such great international interest. The second reason is, of course, the context of the war in Ukraine, where his foreign policies play some kind of role in the developments. And thirdly, because it looks like that there may be a credible opposition challenge to his reign, which is on one hand surprising, on the other hand probably giving a lot of excitement and inspiration for a lot of opponents of illiberal populism worldwide. So what happened and why there is such a competitive election occurring and what can be the consequences is disputed, but I would say that there are, let's say, 7 pillars of the autocratic rule that Viktor Orban built up in Hungary. The first is the full control of his own party. I spare you the details of that, but there is absolutely no defection from the party whatsoever, and then none can be expected in the coming days, at least till the election day, in spite of the fact that there is a credible threat to the party. Second, there is a shady party financing. Chronologically, that was the second to occur. This has characterized Hungary since the 1990s. Most party funding is coming from illegal sources. Viktor Orban's party played a preeminent role in creating the system, but they were not the only players who played a major role in the system. The other major player in creating this system of shady party finances was the Socialist Party, that is by now a defunct tiny little party not running in the election, and which shot itself in the foot sometime in the years of the global financial crisis around 2008. There was until then something like a competitive two-party system in the 2000s, but with this left-wing block of the two-party system falling out of grace with the electorate, there was a period of time when Viktor Orban's party enjoyed close to majority support in the electorate, or even above a little bit. Now, the third factor that helped the emergence of autocratic rule was a peculiar constitutional arrangement and an electoral system. The electoral system is somewhat majoritarian leaning, with the most interesting, though probably underestimated feature of it being that you have to nominate candidates in single-member districts, even if you have absolutely no chance to win those districts, in order to have a party list which can compete for the proportionally distributed seats in the election. So the system gives enormous incentives for small parties to run candidates in single-member districts. These incentives were vastly increased under Fidesz rule to maintain the fragmentation of the opposition, which is the sort of the fourth pillar of the autocratic rule in Hungary. This is now wobbling, this pillar of the system. There are still a couple of other opposition parties running in the election other than the main challenger, but there is a relatively large degree of integration of the opposition vote into a single party for this election, which is the reason why there's a credible challenge. Oh, I forgot to mention the constitutional arrangement. So there is a unicameral parliament, which, with a qualified majority, can change any rule in the country, can replace any elected official, basically in the country directly or indirectly, if you have a qualified majority. But this qualified majority is incredibly easy to achieve if there is a divided opposition on the other side to you as a single unified party, which is the status that Fidesz enjoyed for the last 18 years, but probably not any longer. The fifth major pillar of autocratic rule was, a relatively lucky or favorable international economic climate from 2013, plus the enormous increase of EU funds in the country since around 2009, which they instrumentalized to build the sixth major pillar of autocratic rule, which is a fusion of state, party, and a large part of the private sector. This sixth pillar, the fusion with the state and the private, a large part, about one third of the private sector, creates what some Hungarians call the power factory. The power factory means that about 1 or 2% of the GDP is spent purely on partisan propaganda. And the essence of the regime is that it's much easier to win, much cheaper to win elections by spending 1 or 2% of the GDP on a propaganda machine and then to create all sorts of inconveniences for the opposition than to spend on public health care, public education, public transportation, public administration, and on state pensions. So they economize a lot of money this way, and a fraction of that money can be spent on propaganda, which so far was enough to keep them in power. Now, polls before this election has been suggesting, I mean, at least the independent polls, that the main opposition party has roughly an 11% lead over Fidesz in terms of the popular vote in the country without the mail ballots that coming in from ethnic Hungarians in neighboring countries. This is probably an overestimate of how big is the lead. There are various websites, I mean, there are various people trying to come up with smarter estimates about the likely election outcome than just public opinion polls provide. And those forecasting sites, once sites summarizing these aggregator sites, is on an address called mostvasárnap.hu, which I will probably put in the chat so that you can check it. It's a Hungarian language site, but there is relatively little text on it, and it gives kind of nice, quick summaries of all the aggregators next to each other. And you will see that the most of the experts give more, all of them give now more chance to a Tisza victory than to a Fidesz victory, and there are some they give about a 10, 20, 30% chance to Fidesz victory, and another 10% maybe to a hung parliament where the far right a party that makes it to parliament in all probability as a third party will be pivotal. So the stakes and what can happen after the election, I will leave to Daniel to talk about. Just a few words about the translation of votes into seats and foreign interference in the election. So it's a mixed electoral system, which is very, I mean, in terms of some very bizarre, complex details, is really different from either the German system dramatically or from the Lithuanian system almost as dramatically as from the German. So it is really hard to find a proper comparison to that. It's basically an abusive system which tries to maximize its advantages of opposition and to create maximum opportunity for Fidesz as an entrenched government party to win a large majority of seats, even if it only has 40, 42, 45, 48% of the popular vote. This is partly achieved by most of the seats being allocated in single member districts. The single member districts were drawn such that gives a little bit of advantage to Fidesz, which is relevant for evaluating the election outcomes. So citizens have two votes, and if you the usual election results that you see advertised in media and on Wikipedia and whatever emphasizes the the total list vote, which includes also the mail ballots coming in from neighboring countries, and in that's a very misleading statistics about vote share because it includes these mail ballots that really have minimal impact on the election outcome. It's much better to concentrate on the votes cast in single member districts because those are the ones which really decide the mandate distribution in the country. And in terms of this, and the mail ballot voters don't have a vote in single member districts. So in terms of the single member district vote, the TISA party probably needs, I mean, a 2, 3, 4% lead in order to have more seats than Fidesz will have because of this kind of Fidesz favoring drawing of the electoral map, of the district map. And if the far right party Mi Hazánk also makes it to parliament, which is extremely likely, then probably the TISA party needs a 5-6% lead in terms of this single district votes in order to have an absolute majority in parliament so that it doesn't need the support of the far right party, which is probably more ideologically aligned with Fidesz than with the rest of the opposition. So that's probably as much as it fits in this time about the electoral system. Final results will come out, I mean, sort of preliminary final results will come out on the Saturday after the election when the absentee votes and the mail ballots were already counted. From election night, on election night, we get a relatively clear picture of what is happening. But if you see a tie on election night, then it's almost certain. Then 6 days later, you will see an opposition win because the count of the absentee votes will flip a couple of single member districts in favor of the opposition. This is almost guaranteed. The mail ballots will flip one list seat in favor of Fidesz, but that will be more than counterbalanced by the absentee votes that will be counted on the Friday after the election. And then 30 days after the election, the new assembly has to be assembled by the head of state, and he has to come up with a nominee for prime minister. But Daniel will talk about that. Now, the foreign intervention in election, this is, I mean, happening with all the usual means of Russian interference on the one hand, and on the other hand, there is I mean, lots of endorsements coming in for Viktor Orban from various leaders of the far right worldwide, most prominently from Donald Trump. That these open interventions would make any difference in the last few days of the campaign is extremely unlikely because they are already in there in the vote. This has been known for a long while and advertised widely for a long while how much support Viktor Orban enjoys among international leaders. So that's not a novelty. The Russian operation is probably less important in Hungary than in some other countries, given the fact that for years and years and years, the Hungarian government media is already providing a very friendly environment for Russian propaganda. So, I mean, whatever is the added impact of Russian troll farms and whatnot is probably minimal. And we don't think that a particularly radical action by Russian support schemes for Viktor Orban is particularly likely before the election, or that it would likely have much of an impact to keep him in power. And I think that's where I will conclude, and probably I send you in PDF the presentation, which you couldn't see. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, for a very quick run through of the context of this election. And yes, we'll be very happy to get your presentation and we'll try to circulate it around to the participants as well. I have already so many follow-up questions in my mind, but I will let the other speakers make their interventions first. So, Daniel, on to you. You have recently published a super interesting piece on the five, if I'm not mistaken, post-election scenarios in Hungary. Could you walk us through the different five scenarios and your assumptions behind them? And also, which one you think is the most likely? As we stand right now on March 25th. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sosha. Thank you for the invitation and particularly many thanks for EPD because I know that from a methodological perspective, this scenario analysis is very, very distant from that election observation and election integrity work you are traditionally doing. Please just bear with me for a second. I try to share my presentation. Can you see it?
It's loading for me. So
Yes.
we can see it now. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you so much already for the promotion. As Zosha already mentioned, at the Institute for European Politics, we published last week a scenario analysis. What can be the five plausible scenarios with far-reaching consequences for the European Union and potentially also for Ukraine after the Hungarian elections. And I would like to start with a couple of disclaimers. The first disclaimer is that because I will have approximately 90 to 120 seconds for each of the scenarios, I would like to encourage you to check out the paper on the website of the Institute for European Politics, and our EPD colleagues will also share the link in the chat box. And the second disclaimer is that the scenarios are not necessarily about election outcomes. We don't know what will be the results of the election. I even wouldn't characterize or label this scenario exercise as an analytical tool because it's a planning tool first and foremost. It tries to identify plausible political trajectories which can have very different political outcomes for international partners. And both Zosha and Gabor already mentioned actually the importance of the Hungarian elections, primarily for the decision-making process of the European Union, primarily the strategic decisions related to EU support for Ukraine. And we try to identify actually that distinct trajectories that differ in that regard and identify scenarios to which European partners need to be prepared for if they would like to avoid unpleasant and uncomfortable surprises after the 12th of April. And the scenarios I will introduce in a sort of order of plausibility, and I know that most of the reactions were rather shocked by some of the negative scenarios, but with an eye on the order of plausibility, I would like to emphasize that this is a widely optimistic analysis. Because
Daniel, if I can just jump in, we can see your first slides and the PowerPoint background. If you could switch it into full screen mode, that would be great.
That's a problem because I am in full screen mode and I'm switched the slide and I'm already in the second. I start to reshare it again.
And in the meantime, since Daniel said that he will literally run through the scenarios, I would like to once again encourage all of you to ask questions to our speakers using the Q&A function so that we can give Daniel the opportunity to expand on some of his scenarios in the discussion later.
Are we on the second page?
We are still on the first page. Maybe you can just, while you talk, you can send a quick email to our team with the presentation and we can show it for you.
Still on the first page?
No, perfect.
Okay, perfect. The ghost in the system. Okay, so the five scenarios we identified is an opposition victory with a clear mandate to govern, opposition victory with a parliamentary stalemate, significant election day irregularities that result in the European Union first significantly rigged election, a sort of constitutional coup d'etat, which from a domestic and constitutional perspective is actually two sub scenarios. One aims at a postponement of the election, and another could actually empty out the election results by a constitutional reshuffling of competences and changing actually the political system of the country from a parliamentary to a semi-presidential one. And in the order of plausibility, you would think that a Fidesz victory is still possible, but actually one of the least likely scenarios under the given conditions. And now, for a very strange reason, okay. Did it change? Perfect.
Yes, it did. Go ahead.
So I would like to start with the first scenario and present actually the five in the order that I mentioned: the preconditions, the domestic outcome, and the most important European and international implications. And I would like to underline that the preconditions are also what to watches. So if we see the preconditions emerging, then we can be certain that actually it opens a door for the trajectories what we identify in the frame of that scenario. And concerning the first one and regarding the preconditions, I think that if the elections remain largely free, the elections will be concluded without decisive manipulation. Here I am phases free because certainly elections won't be fair. Hungary has had its last fair election 16 years ago in 2010, but we see that actually the inbuilt systemic biases that led to unfair elections in the past are now not decisive from the perspective of popular support in the elections. So if elections remain largely free, and the current advantage of TISA in the opinion polls can be upheld, and we won't be able to observe a major shift in the campaign narrative from the domestic topics that actually benefit the Hungarian opposition through securitized foreign policy narrative and the narrative of external threat that is benefiting Fidesz. Then, in the case of a significant lead in the popular vote, in our estimates, it's up to 7 or 9 percentage points, there will be a clear parliamentary majority for TISA, potentially even in the case if the extreme right party or Homeland Mi Hazánk clears the threshold. But obviously, from this perspective, it's potentially better or for the governing mandate if our Homelands remains a non-parliamentary party. And if this scenario materializes, then we can actually conclude that we have the only one scenario which ends with positive outcome for Hungary's international partners, because it's in almost certain way a new respect and freedom TISA government will end the veto diplomacy of Hungary, and we will see a foreign policy reset under the new government that aims at the normalization of Hungary's relationship with its formal partners in the European Union and NATO. And most likely it will also end the Hungarian blockade to the 90 billion aid package and other Ukraine-related decision-making. However, even in this scenario, I would like to caution that we might see a protracted government formulation. And particularly with an eye of the 90 billion and the approaching fiscal cliff for Ukraine, European partners would be well advised if they would prepare bridging financial options to keep Ukraine financially afloat. The second scenario is, as mentioned, an opposition victory with a potential parliamentary stalemate. If TISA wins, but with a small margin, Mi Hazánk enters the parliament, we might end up with a fragmented three-party parliament where TISA will be the largest political group, but without a potential government majority. And in this case, I think it's prudent to believe that the Hungarian president will give the mandate for government formulation to Prime Minister Orbán, who might have actually better chances to find support or coalition agreement with our homeland. And and it will end up likely with the Fidesz Mi Hazánk coalition in the parliament, or with the Fidesz minority government externally supported by Mi Hazánk. The implications for international partners will be twofold. First, coalition or support negotiations will be complicated, even between these two parties. So we might expect a protracted government formation, and we might expect actually a nationalist mobilization and competition in the governing coalition. So between Fidesz and or Homeland, which will make any compromise with European and Western partners, particularly on issues related to Russia and Ukraine, even less likely than in the case of a single-party Fidesz government in the future. So we will see increased tensions with the European Union and Ukraine, and continued and increased Hungarian veto risk in Europe. However, if the regime concludes that unfair tools are insufficient to secure victory, and also that losing power is existentially risky for high-ranking members of the current regime, and with an eye on the, I would say, very supportive external political framework and the lack of external constraints, I think it's fair to think that whatever election results will be announced by Prime Minister Orban, they will be endorsed by the Trump administration and the United States. And in that regard, the constraining role of the United States that was present in 2022 is actually, or developed to a sort of authoritarian support for the current Hungarian regime, and taking into account the availability of tools for manipulation, which might be administrative and might operate with election day irregularities, large extent vote buying, and other forms of authoritarian interference into the election integrity, or with the existing toolkit of Russian information manipulation, we might end up either with election day interference or large-scale information manipulation and interference that can have an impact on the election outcome. I agree with Gabor that, yes, we might a bit overestimate the potential impact of Russian information manipulation. But I also would like to underline that we will see at least the same extent, or not a more intense, Russian activities than last year at the Romanian presidential elections or by the Moldovan parliamentary elections, with a very significant structural difference. And the very significant structural difference is that this is an invited interference. So all those state institutions which opposed the Russian manipulation in those two countries will be much less efficient in the Hungarian case. And against that background, it's prudent not to underestimate this opportunity that actually the Russian information manipulation can have an impact. And I think for the European Union, this is certainly the most destructive scenario, and therefore I advise all European partners to pay due attention for it, because it will result in an institutional and political crisis, both for the democratic integrity of the EU and also for its decision making, and actually will result in a challenge that cannot be addressed in the existing EU legal framework, because no further tools will be available that were already available in the past. Article 7 will be continuously blocked, but if we will have a new government in Hungary, which legitimacy is questioned due to the existing election irregularities, we will end up in a situation what the international law calls actually the recognition of governments. And we cannot imagine how, for example, a European Council or EU Council meeting can take place if there are EU member states which are not recognizing the government governments of other member states, while actually ending up with a council meeting where we know that the Hungarian government representatives are sitting there because they have had a fraudulent election and they are even more isolated and more dependent on Russian support than they used to be in the past. That's certainly a nightmare scenario for the European Union. However, because election interference or election manipulation is certainly always subject of interpretation, I don't think that it's the most threatening scenario domestically for the regime. I think the domestically most threatening or most dangerous scenario is what we identify as constitutional coup d'etat. The preconditions are the following: if there is a high probability of opposition victory pre-election, and the regime is unwilling to rely or uncertain in the efficiency of manipulation, but they are very well aware that they still have a constitutional two-third majority, then they may opt actually in the triggering of state of emergency with two-third constitutional majority. It's the real state of emergency written in the Hungarian constitution, not the one that it's in place practically since 2015, which would allow them actually to postpone the elections. Or, as mentioned, and I wouldn't like to go into details, but please check out in the paper, it's still an opportunity for a constitutional reform. Obviously, the closer we get to the elections, the likeliness of this scenario is significantly decreasing. And in a constitutional reform, in a semi-presidential system, Prime Minister Orbán could retain control over the EU and foreign policy competences. And that practically would mean that this scenario is emptying out a potential opposition victory for the Hungarian election. For international partners, this scenario is particularly challenging because from a formal perspective, it would take place in compliance with Hungarian constitutional law. And it would be very difficult to address with legal means. Notwithstanding this, I think we could expect the highest level of societal opposition, because it's not a matter of interpretation that if Fidesz is choosing that pathways, it's practically stealing from the Hungarian society the opportunity to determine its own future. And very briefly to the last scenario, which is the breakdown of the opposition campaign and the last-minute Fidesz victory under the conditions of free or sufficiently free elections. I think in order to be able to see this scenario, we would need to see two crucial developments. First, a disruption of the opposition campaign that can happen through scandals, a communication breakdown, or as a result of the coercive authoritarian tactics of the governing party, and also a shift in the opinion polls that actually the framing and narrative setting around the Ukraine crisis and bilateral escalation or escalation in the bilateral relationship really matters for the Hungarian voters. And I fully agree with Gábor that we don't see such a change in the partisan and voter behavior of Hungarian citizens. This escalation with Ukraine is ongoing now for almost 3 weeks, and we don't see the results at the level of the polls. Notwithstanding this, if that materialize, we can see a Fidesz victory under the conditions of free but not fair elections. And here just one sentence regarding the implications. There are widespread, I would say, patterns of wishful thinking that a Fidesz election victory could lead to fast compromises with the European Union, particularly with regard to the support of Ukraine, because Fidesz would not be interested anymore to double down on those issues. I don't share this wishful thinking, because on the one hand, after every single election victory, Prime Minister Orbán did further radicalize in the past. And I think the two key takeaways would be for Fidesz that actually the radicalization on Ukraine and the escalation led to their success. And therefore they will be motivated to retain that narrative as a central frame in the Hungarian political landscape. So I am very pessimistic that we would see a fast compromise in any EU or Ukraine-related issues with a newly elected Fidesz government. And I just would like to summarize very briefly the key takeaways. And once again, it is that, as was mentioned, it will be one of the most consequential elections for the European Union in 2026, and international partners are well advised, if they take into the account all of these potential scenarios in their strategic planning, they think through possible responses well ahead, particularly with an eye on the fact that some of these election scenarios may require responses that lay outside of the framework of EU law, and we know that yes, this can be one step too far for many European partners. So the sooner they start thinking through these options potentially, the better are the chances that if negative or dark scenarios materialize, the European Union will be able to provide an answer to all of these challenges in due time. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Daniel. This is very comprehensive and honestly also quite scary. Okay. Once again, I encourage all of you to ask questions using the Q&A functions. We already have some very interesting questions, which we will get into as part of the discussion. But now, last but not least, Zsófi, you did maybe not a similar exercise, but you did a research and interviewed some key stakeholders, also asking about what will happen. Can you tell us more about this research exercise that you did, and also how are you as a member of Hungarian civil society, and how is Hungarian civil society preparing for those different scenarios? And maybe do you agree with Daniel when it comes to the most plausible one?
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm fully aware, like Daniel, that this is unusual webinar on the EPD platform, but these are very unusual times. And we in Hungary say that we had historic turning points in 1956 when we had our revolution, in 1990 after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when we had our first free elections, and now in 2026. And now, as we are part of the European Union and the world is more integrated, these elections are also a big concern for our European community. And I also would like to say a big thank you to Gábor and Daniel for your professionalism and inspiration over the years, because I came quite late to the game, so to speak. I did not study political science. I am an activist, and I've been learning from you continuously, and these have been very, very difficult times. And so on that note, now I'm going to share my presentation as well. And guys, keep your questions coming. I know that I have full trust in you that you have amazing questions, to keep them coming while I'm sharing the presentation. So with my colleagues at Unhanged Democracy and Tactical Voting, we looked at one scenario which almost overlaps with one of Daniel's, but not quite. So I think it's good to have opposing views here, so we can have a bit of a debate. So our goal with this research was to map the most high-risk scenarios in the period between April 12th and the 30 days following the elections that could pose serious challenges to electoral integrity, democratic legitimacy, and stable governance. So again, we wanted to explore potential dilemmas and risks as thoroughly as possible. And we believe that the most likely, most risky scenario to democratic stability and electoral integrity is a narrow TISA win between 1 to 5 seats. So again, a narrow TISA win for us would be the highest risk to electoral integrity. And we know, you guys know, because you're election observers, or we are election observers, that E-Day, but the elections don't end with E-Day. And this is the crucial point here. So a close election result would likely not lead to a smooth government transition, but could instead trigger a legal and political crisis lasting for a month or months even. So this is very important because we need to get ready for this, and we cannot all concentrate on the next few weeks. We all need to think the medium run. So in our research, we looked at 4 phases, 4 different stages of the electoral and the government formation process. So E-Day is on the 12th. So we looked at the final days of the campaign, what could happen. And on election day on the 12th, we looked at the legal phase, the objections. That's a very rapid phase, actually, between April 13th and 19th. The second legal phase, when the appeals are happening, between April 20th and May the 1st. And until the formation of the new parliament. And as Gabor said, the new parliament needs to be formed 1 month after E-Day. So in our research, we set out 4 key questions. Who could mobilize better? At what level will the recounts be conducted? Will there be a final result until May the 1st? And could there be a stable government formed? And as you can see from my notes here, the answers are not too positive. However, that is also a possibility, because we believe that it's also an opportunity to flex our muscles and grow as a civil society. So the key findings of the report in case of a narrow TISA victory would be with Russian escalation monopoly, attrition, delay, and confusion, as we can already see from press reports. Russia is heavily involved in Fidesz's campaign here. There would be prolonged legal procedures, and Fidesz would want to maintain uncertainty and disrupt the information environment. So basically wear out the other side, prolong, and put pressure on the other side as much as possible and wear the other side out. Interestingly, our research found that even though Russia seems like a strong ally of Fidesz now, but this may shift as also the popular pressure would change. So on the other side, TISA, on the other opposition parties, along with the independent media, if we look at that side, what we are seeing now, and that would continue, this fragmented and reactive approach that we are seeing, and this could weaken public acceptance of the election results, and potentially undermine confidence in governability. We expect a lot of complaints on electoral irregularities. Hungary is not Russia. I saw a question in the chat here. May I address it now? Hungary is not Russia, not Belarus. There is no ballot stuffing, in the polling station. Most fraud happens outside of the polling station. We have a very strong codependent system, and the most vulnerable people are exposed, such as members of the Roma community, homeless people, people in elderly care homes. And there is a documentary coming out tomorrow on Thursday at 6 p.m. that is going to unveil the systematic nature of this vote buying and voter coercion phenomena. And I would also like to emphasize that Unhacked Democracy started its journey in 2018 by uncovering electoral fraud, vote buying, and voter coercion with our research. So basically, this documentary will show the voters in a more dramatic way what we have already set out in our papers. So we expect that there's going to be a lot of complaints, a lot of different types of evidence that will be filed. But if this is not organized properly and it's handled insufficiently, it could delegitimize these actions of legal actions, and to gain it needs to be. So bottom line is the story needs to be there, so it has to be a credible story behind these allegations. So in the event of a narrow TISA victory, again, to form a stable government, we believe that a narrow majority between 1 to 5 seats will not be sufficient, because there could be compromise along the way. Fidesz could put pressure on some of the TISA MPs, and they would have to withdraw, or they would be compromised politically, or could be even both. So there is a chance for that. That's why this 1 to 2 mandates, 1 to 5 mandates will not be sufficient, we believe. And as Gabor mentioned, there is a possibility of a hung parliament as well. Disputed mandates and delays in finalizing results could create temporary parliamentary paralysis, even if one side formally wins a majority. The President of the Republic and the caretaker government or Prime Minister. So between the election and the formation of the new parliament, the outgoing government retains full powers. It's very important. So the new parliament, full or hung, must be formed by May the 11th, as we said. And prolonged legal remedy phase may affect when the election results become legally final and when the new parliament with all members is fully constituted. So essentially anything can happen in this period, and this is what we need to watch. Gabor already mentioned the absentee votes. I just read an article that we have in-country absentee voters and out-of-country absentee voters. The registration for out-of-country absentee voting has already reached record highs. It stands at 65,000 now. It will go up significantly. We expect around 300,000 in-country absentee voters. And these votes are predominantly opposition voters, which means in constituencies where the results will be tight, the absentee votes could change the results. And we expect the results on the 17th, 18th of April, so they will be counted probably on the 16th, and the results will come in on 17th, 18th. And the results can be changed in up to 5 or 6 constituencies. It's more likely that it will be changed. The result will be changed in 3 constituencies. And we ask international observers to watch this process, especially the in-country absentee votes, how they are transported and stored, because we believe that this could be a potential danger zone, and we need to ensure the trust in the fairness of the elections. The core number 5, election results versus governability. the core crisis may shift um, whether the winner can actually govern. So the battle is political, legal, and also on the communications front. We need to look at all of these three pillars to get the full picture. It's a very complex battle. And this is why it's important that we are here and talking about it together. So hopefully we will come up with some great ideas in the discussion. And I wanted to just, since we are from the international community here, we want to urge a prompt recognition of the political party that has received a mandate from the Hungarian society, helping to reduce uncertainty and reinforce democratic legitimacy once the outcome is clear. This is very important. We know that President Trump will probably be the first one to make a statement on Truth Social. It's going to be an interesting time just straight after the election, so watch this space. We ask members of the international community to proactively prepare for these potential scenarios and understand the prolonged result certification and legal and technical escalation steps, the electoral procedure with the focus on the absentee votes again, and please watch out for the spread of the legitimizing narratives. And I'd like to conclude my presentation with this. I think.
Great. Thank you so much, Jofi. Since we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, maybe if I can do a quick round so that we can answer the more technical questions before we move on to the more analytical ones, if you allow me. So there's a question from our colleague Ivan Shukshin regarding the publication of election results by polling station immediately after they are counted. Jofi, I guess that's a question to you. Is there a system either by phone or internet that allows results to be transferred and published within minutes from counting?
So the public will be able to check the results right away on the National Election Office's website. And please, Gabor, jump in if you want to add something, because I know that you've been following this for decades now. What happens in the polling station is that it's the administrator calls the local election office and transmits the data on the phone. And one of the members of the local election office type in the numbers, the results into the system. Just imagine an Excel sheet. So it just checks whether the numbers are added up, because there are different types of votes, and they have to match up with the number of voters who turned up. And this is how the results get into the system, and every polling station commission member gets a hard copy. It's very important. They all get a hard copy of the protocol with a stamp on it, and they can immediately send it to their parties, and the parties usually check the results right away, compare it with the National Election Office's website, polling station by polling station.
Okay, thank you. Another technical question. So when does the president have to ask a party leader to form a government? And at the same time, when the president calls the parliament to convene, what if at any point not all of the MPs are confirmed? And what kind of majority is necessary to elect the prime minister? I guess this goes to either Jofi or Gabor or whichever one of you.
Yeah, so it's a
Gabor, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are 107 declarations, not single election result. So there are the 106 single member districts, and because of this bizarre complexity of the how votes from the single member districts well, also influence the distribution of the list mandates. The list seats can only be allocated once all the 106 constituencies are declared. If there is recount or any, ordinary complaint procedure taking some time in a single district, that should be resolved within a couple of days, so that wouldn't lead to a major delay. If something unprecedented happens, I mean, in one kind of game, we came to the idea of probably an electricity failure, burning down some ballot boxes before a recount or something that might lead to a revote, which is not a by-election, but let's say a revote in a couple of precincts in a single member districts, which can take a little more time to organize. And then that may indeed lead to the outcome that some single member district seats are not yet declared before the new parliament has to convene. And that would also mean the quite I mean, I think it would be a shock to everyone that the list seats, the 93 list seats, cannot be distributed either, right? So we are there with a new parliament forming with just let's say 100 members out of the 199 expected present. Um, as Daniel and Jofi hinted at, of course, it could also happen that some of those people cannot attend the session because they were suddenly exposed as pedophiliacs and they are under arrest and investigated, or some financial crimes were discovered which need to be examined, and some of those people are not present or were already arrested during the election campaign because candidates don't enjoy immunity during Hungarian election campaign since 2018. So there can be some funny scenarios here, but it looks like, at least, I mean, lawyers didn't find any reason why such a rump parliament would not form. So it's very clear in the basic law, in this Fidesz written basic law of 2011, that within 30 days of the election, the head of state has to call a first session, I mean, as the latest, as a first session of the new parliament, and has to present their one nominee for prime minister. He can try to play games. I mean, the head of state.
Okay, thank you, Gabor, because we have
Yeah.
12 more
Yeah,
questions to
sorry.
go through,
Yeah.
and they're very interesting. But maybe if you could just, in one sentence, in terms of the majority to elect the prime minister, what is this, a simple majority or a two-thirds? What kind of majority are we looking at?
Simple majority, a simple majority, a simple majority of those present can elect the new prime minister. Well, yeah.
Okay.
And just
In
may I add?
principle, in
Yeah.
Daniel's scenarios, you see that the head of state may have some leverage if there's a hung parliament, in the sense that neither Fidesz nor TISA have an overall majority on their own. But as long as one or the other has an overall majority and its deputies remain loyal to the party until the new parliament meets for the first time, there is no chance that anyone else but the choice of the majority party can become prime minister.
May I just add one thing?
Sure.
So the National Election Commission is required to announce the national party list results, which we've been talking about, no later than the 19th day after the vote, which would be May 1st. However, this process could be delayed if repeat elections are held in any of the single member constituencies. And it's very important because if the appeal goes up to the Supreme Court, then to the Constitutional Court can pass it back to the Supreme Court, and there can be this legal ping pong back and forth. So this can drag on.
Okay, I feel like we're all becoming PhDs in the Hungarian constitutional order here and the judicial system, but maybe that's the right time to dig into that. One more technical question, maybe Daniel, if I can address that to you. Is there a deadline for Orban Fidesz to declare a state of emergency and postpone elections? Like, when does your constitutional coup scenario become implausible?
Thank you so much. I think only exists a political answer to this question and not a constitutional legal one, because obviously the ordinary sessions of the Hungarian parliament were already concluded or will be concluded this week before the April 12 elections. But even until April 12, if pressing issues warrant, the government or the president can call for an extraordinary session of the Hungarian parliament. And if the parliament will be summoned for an extraordinary session, then these political scenarios still remain also feasible under the existing framework of the Hungarian constitutional law. And this is, I didn't mention it in the scenarios, which opens up the opportunity for certain false flag operations, which might create a motivation or, a premise for the president or the government to summon an extraordinary parliamentary session and, for example, vote with 2/3 constitutional supermajority for the introduction of emergency, constitutional emergency.
And I'm sorry,
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
we all need to switch our, our hats a little bit. And yes, unfortunately, it is very legal heavy, but this is the reality. And from electoral process to constitutional law and looking at again, the elections will not be over. We believe there is a high likelihood the elections will not be over on the 13th of April. And we also have to, learn a lot more and get ready for this. So it's a very different type, unusual election.
Yes. If you allow me just one follow-up sentence. So the old parliament is losing its mandate with the constitutive session of the new parliament. So technically, you have an opportunity to summon an extraordinary session of the old parliament even after the April 12 elections, when the results are well known, but the constitutive session still didn't take place if extraordinary development warrants it. And as mentioned, the government or the president has the mandate to summon the extraordinary session.
Okay. Wow.
No,
So,
maybe I
Jeffy,
would
you
add
mentioned.
maybe I would add one thing. So Zsófi
Sure.
and Daniel are absolutely right about the rich legal possibilities that are present. Well, it is an autocratic system where on paper, the government has the qualified majority in parliament, which is needed for any kind of extraordinary legal circus to occur. And so that's accurate. Politically, I think we all share the perception that not everything which is in principle legally possible is in the cards. So the political risk of these extreme hardball scenarios, the government playing around with with the letter of law to defy the will of the electorate, are incredibly risky. And it looks like that the government doesn't have what it takes to back it up with force if it comes to that, such legal scenarios. So that's why, I presented it such that, easy peasy, it goes a relatively orderly way, because these legal possibilities are not there, but I think the political feasibility of these extreme scenarios is limited on the ground by the situation in the country.
Yeah, thank you, Gabor, for that. But I think, over the last couple of years, we have all learned to say, not to say never say never, or to say never say never, because,
Absolutely, yeah.
well, that's the reality of life in 2026. Zsófi, you mentioned absentee votes. We have a question about them. Could you tell us more about who is counting those votes, at which level they are counted, and also maybe more politically, is there any kind of opportunity or legal provision for the incumbent government to, or the election commission, to discard those absentee votes if they see that the votes are leaning more towards the opposition?
First of all, we know historically that these votes are opposition leaning, so that's almost a given. And now that we are seeing record registration numbers, it's a question of numbers, volume. They are counted at a local, so in every constituency, there is a precinct where the votes are in Hungary, inside the country, where the votes are not counted on the night of the election, because they wait for these traveling absentee votes to arrive. And then once they arrive, they usually count them on the Thursday after the election, Sunday's election, and they mix these ballots together. So nobody would be able to track who was voting for who in that precinct. And so they are counted by the original polling station commission members who were there on election. They have to go back and count these ballots.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, a question to you about TISA, because I think for many of us, TISA is a bit of an unknown animal. So if you could tell us a little more about where TISA also stands politically, but also on foreign policy, and do you think after the election, can we really expect TISA to be very different from Fidesz, especially with regards to policy towards the EU, policy towards the Ukraine, and is there any kind of threat that after the election, TISA will fall apart?
Yes, thank you so much for this question. I think the party is an enigma for each and every of us. So potentially we might only try to identify what we can watch and in what sources we can try to find an answer to this question. And I think the two things we can zoom in is A, the published election manifesto of the party, and B, actually the human resource politics of the party and the selection of the foreign policy personnel, Anita Orban, who is actually the nominated Minister of Foreign Affairs in a potential future TISA government. And on the basis of the information we have in the election manifesto and what we see through the human resource politics of the party, I think it's fair to conclude that yes, a constructive reset of Hungary's relationship with the European Union and with Western partners in general is a strategic goal for the party. And in that regard, I would also dare to say that the election manifesto even went further that many of us expected. And there are some, I would say, very sensitive statements. For example, the review of Chinese car manufacturing and battery manufacturing investments in the country, the review of the PACT2 nuclear agreement with Russia. These are not cautious. These statements are not the proofs of a very cautious foreign policy that would aim at further balancing between European partners, China and Russia, but a rather straightforward one. Obviously, the main audience, the main target group of that election manifesto is domestic. But notwithstanding this, I think all signs point in the direction of a wish to reset. I can offer a further what to watch. And it was that joining the European Public Prosecutor's Office was a central promise throughout the election campaign. And it can be traced back even to 2024 and the rise of the party. If during the first 7 or 10 days, the new TISA government will join the European Public Prosecutor's Office, then I think we will have a very firm evidence that they are ready to walk the talk. If we will see a new Hungarian government that seeks and finds excuses why they wouldn't like to deliver on that promise, then I think we have an evidence that we can be concerned how they will follow up on this. But I would like to underline a very important differentiation. Of course, there will be constitutional and state capture in Hungary. Of course, without a two-thirds constitutional supermajority, the hands of the new Hungarian government in many respects, when it comes to judicial, constitutional, rule of law reforms, will be tied down just as the hands of the Polish governments are tied down since the autumn of 2023. But the situation at the field of EU and foreign affairs, it's completely different. It's an exclusive government competence. No legislative mandate is required, for example, joining the European Public Prosecutor's Office. And therefore, this is exactly the policy field or where the new government can deliver, and can deliver in a way that it can be very effectively communicated even for the Hungarian society. And against that background, yes, I am confident that we would see a very different foreign policy potentially from day one, but we just need to follow closely the what to watches, and they will instruct us practically from the first week of the new government in which direction Péter Magyar is heading in government position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A question to Gabor. Could you relatively briefly explain once again the challenge and the systemic bias that comes through the single member districts, and also if you could talk about Mihazang and how certain are you that they will be helpful to Orban in forming a majority?
Okay, this second question is a simpler. We don't really know how they will act if there is a hung parliament. I mean, probably they will show more independence of Fidesz than what generally people assume today in Hungary. I think their long-term thinking is that they will stay in opposition and keep just getting stronger and stronger from opposition. But this is not going to be tenable if there is a hung parliament. They will have to take a side, and that's going to be very exciting to see. They are certainly far more likely on ideological or any other ground to come down on the Fidesz side than on the opposition side. But I wouldn't put a number on this probability difference. But the first question, so there are two factors here. One is malapportionment. That is that it's not exactly the same number of people who are eligible to vote in one single district and the other. And there is a correlation, a negative correlation between the number of people who vote in a district and how strong Fidesz support is likely to be in that constituency. Typically, the constituencies that where Fidesz is stronger were, drawn smaller on the map. So fewer votes are enough to win a single member district seat for Fidesz because of malapportionment than for the opposition. And the other factor is a more straightforward gerrymander. To what extent this is a deliberate drawing of district boundaries with an eye on partisan advantage is not so clear. There is absolutely no information about how this happened. It was a completely secretive process. We don't even know who draws electoral maps in Hungary, and there is certainly absolutely no public information about the process available. We only see the outcome, and the outcome is that, because the opposition vote is more concentrated in cities, and which are split into multiple constituencies, because it could be awkward to create constituencies that run from the middle of Budapest till somewhere in the countryside to form a relatively average kind of political climate in the country. Therefore, the constituencies in the big cities tend to have bigger opposition majorities in a close election than the other districts, the sort of more rural districts in the countryside, which have the Fidesz majorities. So in a close election, I mean, countrywide close election, you would expect Fidesz to win a couple of districts with smaller majorities than the opposition will have in those homogeneously urban environments, because Fidesz doesn't have homogeneously rural districts to win. They only have constituencies which mix up a couple of small towns with rural areas, and those are not so extreme in their both distributions as some of the downtown environments in the bigger cities. So these are the two factors that work against the opposition and make its vote less efficient.
Sorry, do I remember correctly the number 300,000 more? So the opposition would need 300,000 more.
I don't like absolute
votes.
numbers.
No, to have the same number of seats. You don't like this? Okay.
I don't like absolute numbers because that depends on turnout and then the size changes in the size of the electorate. So percentage-wise, I think that's much easier to talk. So the biggest opposition party needs something between 2 to 3% more of the single member district votes than Fidesz to have more seats. Now, if only two of them make it to parliament, that more seats means a majority of parliament. If Mi Hazánk makes it to parliament with 3% more of the single district vote than what Fidesz has, you have more seats than Fidesz, most probably, but you are not going to have an absolute majority of seats. So if Mi Hazánk is also in parliament, and you don't want to have a coalition with them, you don't want to risk that they go with Fidesz, then you need to have probably a 4, 5, 6% lead over Fidesz by the main opposition party to have an even chance on having an overall majority in parliament.
If I can have a quick follow-up to that, since the question whether Mi Hazánk gets into parliament seems to be important, is there any campaign in terms of tactical voting so that Mi Hazánk gets into parliament? Or is there something that is being talked about among Hungarian voters?
Well, Mi Hazánk is campaigning to get it to make it to parliament.
I mean, yes, they are for sure. It's in their interest, but
they get quite a lot of media attention now that they potentially are a pivotal party in the new parliament. Of course, there are loads of interviews with their leader in all over the media, in the independent media, about what their conditions may be, and he answers very competently as sort of as a good campaigner. He gives very rhetorical and campaign compatible answers to that question, which, of course, I mean, if I were him, I wouldn't reveal my conditions in the first place, I mean, before the election. So it's not very informative what he says, but it's good campaign rhetoric what he says. They are capable people. I would have little doubt that they can pull this out. The only danger for them is if Fidesz decided a couple of weeks ago or maybe even a couple of months ago to go seriously after their vote and take it over. But I think very sensibly, Fidesz calculated that Mi Hazánk is capable of attracting some government critical votes, and it's so nice to have, okay, let's say half the Mi Hazánk vote is such that Fidesz could probably get it, but with that 2-3% of the vote, they could get relatively fewer seats for themselves than Mi Hazánk get with those 2-3% potentially pro-Fidesz vote if they add that 2-3-4% of the government critical vote that they can attract in elections. So this is probably a sensible game for Fidesz to let Mi Hazánk in government, with a little risk, of course, because these people are not necessarily completely reliable. We don't know how independent they are of Fidesz or of anyone or of some other potential, sources for outside influence. I mean, we don't know who exactly in that party is loyal to what call and to their own agendas or questions. So this
okay. Thank you so much, Gabor. We are slowly running out of time, and I have two more important questions that I would really like to ask you all. The first one to Daniel and maybe also to Joffrey. Daniel, you mentioned in your third scenario a full-scale manipulation. You said the EU's first rigged elections. But what if the manipulation is much less obvious? What if it's more opaque? What should be the reaction from the Hungarian opposition? Do you think that Peter Magyar would call on his supporters to go out to the streets? And also, what should be the reaction from the European institutions?
Thank you so much. Try to be very fast. I am not advising the Hungarian opposition, and I am certainly not taking the responsibility to formulate any advice in that regard. What is certain that whoever ever read an OSCE election observation report, it is clear that there will be no black and white statement in how far actually this election was compliant with existing OSCE standards. So we need to go very, very, very far with authoritarian measures to get a black and white election observation report. So it will be, and it will remain a matter of interpretation. But I think even in the previous cases, if one wanted to understand the message, then it was clear, for example, the statements about the systemic overlapping of party and state resources and so on. So, of course, everyone will have the political opportunity to use certain parts of the reports in their own narrative. It will be a political task to forge a consensus among EU member states. How do they interpret actually the legality and the democratic qualities of the Hungarian elections, and obviously also the interim and the final report of the OSCE election observation mission. Just one sentence here. We also know that there will be another OSCE election observation mission from the Parliamentary Assembly, which is partially organized and advised by Daria Boyarskaya, a former close aide of Vladimir Putin. And I think that mission and her role is also underlining that potentially there is an attempt to confuse OSCE messaging. That, for example, the regime can rely on certain potentially more friendly and less critical statements from the OSCE than the official ODIHR election observation mission report will be.
Yeah, thank you. I think many of us here know the difference between the OSCE ODIHR and the OSCE PA, but I would not require the entire European society to understand those intricacies. Joffrey.
And I would like to ask the EU member states the leaders in EU member states to watch closely the Hungarian free press and Hungarian civil society and consult with us on a regular basis, precisely because they look at the OSCE ODIHR statement press conference, but it's very opaque, and a lot of times it's up to us, the members of civil society and the free press, to explain what they really mean. And that's a challenge. And in situations like this is adding extra pressure on us. So I would also like to ask OSCE ODIHR observers to push their own boundaries and say what they really mean. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one last question to all three of you. So we have a little over 2 weeks left. As we all know, these last days can be very, very crucial. I mean, for us at EPD, we just came back from Slovenia, where the last week or two of the election has really been messy, if I may say so. What is the mood in Hungary right now, and what is something, if you were to pick one or two things that we should be expecting of these last 2 weeks of the campaign? What do you think will be happening? Maybe Gabor, I can start with you.
Sorry, I got distracted by the latest poll coming out in Hungary and then showing a dramatic opposition lead. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So the question was, what should we be expecting in those last 2+ weeks of the campaign, are you expecting anything dramatic to happen? I was referencing the context of Slovenia, where we were just observing where, we had the black cube scandal and also a energy crisis.
So there will almost certainly be lots of dramatic news in the last 18 days of the campaign. Surely there are loads of AI videos piling up here and there, and lots of discrediting information about opposition candidates. It is inconceivable that would not be a barrage of compromising information about opposition candidates in the last 2 weeks. Particularly in the last 2 weeks, I imagine you time those things to which you don't want them to have enough time to respond, because they are so ungrounded allegations. So that's the time for the ungrounded allegations in particular. The government is, of course, very well positioned to play this on a very, very large volume to the Hungarian public. Will they have a big impact? I think after 16 years of this high volume compromat propaganda about various opposition forces, and the pause really not moving at all for the last 10 months, I find it difficult to imagine that the pause will change from anything that we are going to see in the last 18 days. But there will be lots of drama, lots of soap opera.
Okay. Daniel?
Thank you. I'm a bit more concerned. And the reason is that it's a strategic of interest of Fidesz that the campaign narrative remain focused on the tensions between Ukraine and Hungary. And therefore, my expectation is that we will see continued escalation in the next 2 to 3 weeks, both in the international arena. And here just the news from today that Prime Minister Orbán announced the gradual stopping of gas transit from Hungary to Ukraine, and that can amount up to 1/3 of Ukraine's gas import. But I also wouldn't exclude further escalation in the domestic arena. On the one hand, we have witnessed the partisan and political use of official Hungarian intelligence services over the past couple of days, even against Hungarian citizens, investigative journalists, and even police members. This is largely unprecedented. And we have seen also another unprecedented escalatory move 2 weeks ago, which was actually the hijacking and kidnapping of a Ukrainian money transport over Hungarian territory. And with that, and I think it's not a superlative, practically the toolkit of hybrid warfare entered the Hungarian election campaign. And here I must be self-critical. This is something what I have had excluded and practically also excluded even a month ago. And it shows actually really, as Gabor mentioned, the dramatic dynamics of escalation, both domestically and internationally. And we still have 3 weeks to go down that road. Thank you.
Zsófi, you can have the last words before I close.
So the mood is anxious. I think everybody is nervous because everything is so uncertain, and you feel that a regime around you is collapsing and you don't know what's coming. It's a very strange feeling. Finally, people feel brave and to come forward and speak up, and you see a lot more young people voicing their opinions than I've ever seen before. But one day people are hopeful, the other day they are scared. So the mood is very anxious, and everyone knows it's a historic moment.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you. Thank you also to everyone attending. I'm sorry we did not manage to answer all of your many questions, which I'm really grateful for, but I hope we managed to touch upon many different issues and many different scenarios as to what we can expect both before but also after this momentous election. Please read Daniel's paper. Please follow EPD. We will be in Hungary, and we will definitely be speaking more about the Hungarian election. And to everybody in Hungary, we wish you a good election. We wish you I mean, we encourage you to go and vote however you're voting. Because as a Polish citizen, I can say, it is important to exercise that right, whatever will happen after. So thank you so much for being with us. We'll be posting the recording on our YouTube channel, and please consult all the materials that our speakers have shared. Thank you all once again so much, and see you all at our next webinar.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much.
For your attendance.